This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for How to Super Age with Elise Marie Collins. And let me tell you, Elise, you have been so busy super aging, and it's exciting to see how much knowledge you're providing to our listeners. So thank you for being part of this.
Thank you. I am so excited about our guest today, Vanessa Nixon. And before we get started, I wanted to hold up my book, Chakra Tonics. I did a little reading, so I have the bookmark here. And last week, my camera's kind of backwards. So if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, then you can't see the book. So I'll say the title. It's Chakra Tonics, Essential Elixirs for Mind, Body, and Spirit. Chakra Tonics, Essential Elixirs for the Mind, Body, and Spirit. Yeah, so that's the book. And it's out in a second edition. It hit #1 new release in several categories, including homeopathy and injuries and rehabilitation. How it got on those lists, not quite sure, but I know one person helping me to promote it is selves. She's designed a line of clothing for injuries, so you can unsnap injuries and rehab, or any kind of thing of cancer surgery. You can kind of unbutton your.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really cool. I'll have her on the show sometime. But I digress. I'm so excited about our guest today, and I wanted to segue and say she did a fabulous retreat last week for the stages of menopause, and I'll let her talk about that because I want to hear about it. And she gave away a copy of Chakra Tonics. So that was very exciting. So our guest today is Vanessa Nixon. And I realized I forgot to ask her for a bio, so I might be asking her. I have her speaker sheet. She is a specialist. She's a naturopath, and she's a specialist in the 3 stages of menopause. And I am so excited about today because she touches not only on the journey of menopause from, how can we avoid hot flashes or insomnia, all the uncomfortable and sometimes unwelcome, quote unquote, symptoms of menopause, but she also focuses on the spiritual, which I am really into, and reframing it. That's my words. But from what I know about her, she really is shifting the narrative, shifting the constructs about what menopause is and all the stages. She talks about the perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. So I hope that I did her justice. Is there anything else you want to share about yourself? Because I realized I was so excited, and I know you, and I have your speaker sheet, but I was like, actually, I don't even have a bio. So I made one up. Hope that worked. Is there anything else? I know you're a naturopath. Did you study that in Washington? Because I know you're in Washington. There's a lot of schools there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on the show. I'm so thrilled to be here with you both today. And that was an excellent introduction. So thank you very much for that. And I am a traditional naturopath, and I do live in Washington State, and I studied here. And as well as being a naturopath and specializing in nutritional healing, herbal medicine, homeopathy, flower essences, those kinds of natural modalities. I also am the CEO, owner, and founder of my own natural cosmetics company called Natural Look Mineral Makeup. And as well, I am a professional belly dance instructor. And so I weave these 3 elements of natural health, natural beauty, and natural movement together to form a really solid foundation of natural living for women of all ages, but especially women who are in that midlife phase and making that transition through peri, mid, and post menopause, as you mentioned.
Wow. Yes, I did know that about you. And I didn't actually know that you had your own cosmetic line. So I'd love for you to share a link so we'll put that in the chat, because that sounds like a great resource for our listeners. Fantastic. And I wanted to know, I know you talk a lot about the 3 myths of menopause. what are the 3 myths of menopause? Because I'm sure there's probably even more than 3, but what are the top 3 myths of menopause?
Yes, there are lots of misconceptions around menopause. And I think it's because menopause is still kind of a taboo subject. We don't talk about it in our culture. In some places around the world, it's starting to be talked about. Like right now in the UK, menopause is really big. Everybody's starting to talk about it, which I love. But here in the US, where we are, it's still kind of taboo. And even, as women, we don't talk to each other about it. Mothers don't talk to their daughters about it. So we just don't know what to expect. And so there are lots of misconceptions. And because of the way our society has been built, there are lots of built-in myths. And so that's where I find the top 3 myths that I love to talk about, because I think that they are sort of subconscious. They're just things that we've been conditioned to believe. And so we don't really examine them unless somebody brings them up to us. So the first myth of menopause that I've identified is a common thread throughout women, is that menopause equals death. And when I say that, people are like, what do you mean? Like, it sounds very dire and very intense. And there's a couple of pieces there. One is that in the past, for instance, just 100 years ago, the average life expectancy for a woman in the US was only 53 years. So a lot of women did not live much past menopause. So if they were going through menopause, they knew they were kind of at the end of their lives. 200 years ago, the life expectancy in the US was only 34 years old. So a lot of women didn't even live to get to menopause. So we still have this kind of ancestral memory of that menopause equals the end of your life. And so I think that's important to acknowledge, that in the past, menopause was something that millions and millions of women did not have the opportunity to experience. They didn't have the honor of being able to go through menopause and get to this post-menopausal stage of life that we now have the opportunity to in this day and age. The other piece of the menopause equals death myth is not so much of a myth, it just needs some reframing, and that is menopause is the death of the reproductive phase of our lives. It's the end of our childbearing years. And so, some of us have very different feelings about that. Some of us are relieved and so grateful to be at the end, not experiencing monthly menstrual cycles anymore, not having to worry about, an unwanted pregnancy. That can be really freeing for some women. For other women, though, it may bring a lot of grief. It may bring a lot of sadness, and it may really feel like a loss or a death, of that period of life. And so, there are a few pieces there to look at. But I like to reframe that with more accurate information that today, the life expectancy here in the US for women is over 80 years. And so we can expect to not only live many years past menopause, but several decades. And so we no longer are living in a time where menopause literally equals the end of life. And not only that, but the centenarian population, the population of people who live to be 100 years old or more, is expected to grow by 8-fold in the next few decades. And 80% of centenarians are women. So most of us can expect to live, maybe even more years after menopause than we did before. So it's really just a midpoint. And we can expect to have, the whole second half of our lives to live after menopause. The second myth that I see really strongly, especially in our culture, is that menopause is a disease, that it's a state of ill health. And that's because our medical institutions actually frame it that way. In some medical volumes, menopause is defined as a deficiency of hormones, of reproductive hormones. So we are led to believe that in this stage of life, there's something deficient about us. There's something wrong, that this is something that needs to be treated, and it needs to be treated with pharmaceuticals or surgery, but that it is a condition. It's a medical condition that needs treatment. And so we all are kind of conditioned as we grow to think that, oh, we're going to enter into this state of illness, in menopause, that this is a deficiency and that we need to address this medically. And so what I like to do is reframe that as menopause is a natural phase of life. Women are supposed to go through menopause. This is natural and normal. And not only that, but there are gifts to this phase of life. There's a reason that we go through menopause. And if we reframe it that way, it can be something to look forward to. It's not something that we, look at and dread because, oh no, we're going to be in this, state of deficient hormones. When we are in our reproductive years, we have high levels of reproductive hormones because we need them to potentially have children, to, reproduce. But once we're past that phase, we don't need that level of hormones. So it's not that we're deficient in it. We're just coming to a new normal for our hormonal levels. And sometimes we might have symptoms because as those hormones decline to the new natural normal level, we might see fluctuations, especially if we have some health conditions going into menopause. And there are many, many ways that we can address that naturally, and they don't necessarily need treatment. And then the third myth around menopause is that your life is going downhill. Your body's going to start breaking down. You're going to be suffering from all of these symptoms. You're going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to have hot flashes. You're going to have brain fog. You're going to have short-term memory loss. You're going to have mood swings, and life is just going to go downhill after that. And the reframe there is that life will be different because you are different. You're in a different phase of your life. And the myth, the misconception is that it's going to be a negative thing. Many women experience menopause as the best phase of their lives, as the most productive, the most impactful, the time of their lives when they really are able to live their passions and, birth new creative projects into the world and really find out who they are, aside from, perhaps their families or their children or, their careers. They really have the opportunity, sometimes for the first time in their lives, to focus on themselves and decide, who do I want to be in this next half of my life? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do? Who do I want to spend it with? What are the things that I want for my life now? And so it can be a really, really wonderful, and for some women, the best time of their lives.
I love those myths. Not I love them, but I love the way you frame them. And I particularly was leaning in when you talked about centenarians, because I've studied centenarians and I hadn't actually really thought about that in in terms of menopause, that yes, there, of course, we know that women live longer than men. And I know that also centenarians, for our audience, are the fastest growing population group of all groups, because birth rate is declining, we're getting older, and yeah, so eightfold, that group is growing eightfold. I think Japan has the largest number of centenarians, and then we have the blue zones where there are, Vanessa's nodding for those of you listening, we have the blue zones. And if anybody doesn't know, because sometimes I say blue zones and I'm like, doesn't everybody know what a blue zone is? But they don't. Blue zones are areas in the world where there is a higher percentage of centenarians than anywhere else. And there's 5 of them. I won't go into them all because you can buy my book. It's in the book. But I wanted to know, it kind of segues from the myth that we're going downhill after menopause. How is menopause a spiritual initiation? Like, tell me about the spiritual part, because that just sounds so juicy and fun. And I think some of us are experiencing it, looking forward to experiencing it, or just full on experiencing it. So tell us about that.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about because, in certain cultures in the past, and even I believe in certain cultures in parts of the world today, there is a very different view of menopause where, young women actually look forward to the time when they go through menopause because they understand its power. They understand that there are gifts that to this phase of life that you can't really experience beforehand in any other phase. Once we get to this phase of life, there are a lot of shifts that occur, not just within our bodies and within our hormonal system, but one thing that I not only experience with my clients, myself, with other women, but in everything that I've studied about menopause is there are external shifts. There are internal and external shifts that are happening during menopause. And these are happening for us so that we take the opportunity to step back and look really deeply. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before. We experience these things so that we can take the opportunity to delve into the parts of us that we have not looked at previously. And now we have all of this life experience. We have all of this wisdom so that when we do take the opportunity to look really deeply, we can bring our gifts and wisdom out into the world in a way that's in alignment with our inner wisdom and also can be impactful for the world. So when we take this opportunity to look at these things that are happening to us, that can create this kind of initiatory period. For example, in my own life, within a 2-year period, I went through menopause. I went through a divorce after 20 years of marriage. I moved to a new city. I bought my own house for the first time by myself. 2 of my 3 daughters moved out on their own. And I restarted my business after focusing on raising children for 20 years. And then I started dating for really the first time in my life as a postmenopausal woman and all of the things that go along with that. So all of these changes happened at the same time that I was going through menopause. And, that's not saying that all of those things happen for every woman, but shifts and changes tend to happen at this time of our lives. And I was able to, with the tools that I had gathered through, the previous phases of my life and the experience and the support system of a network of really wonderful, caring women that I had cultivated, I was able to navigate all of those shifts and changes and be able to look at each one of them, no matter how challenging they were, as opportunities for growth, opportunities to grow a different part of myself and evolve to a new place where from that place, I could then, create a new business. I could create new relationships. I could foster new communities and, new creative, artistic ways of being in the world. And so this is an example of how all of these challenges, whether they're physical symptoms, whether they're changes in your career, in your relationship, in, maybe you start caring for aging parents, there's so many shifts and changes that happen, but no matter what they are, they can be opportunities. They can be initiatory periods that can motivate you, inspire you to look deeper and really grow as a person and come out of it on the other side with so much more wisdom and with this, gratitude, realizing that all of these things happened so that now I'm in this more evolved, better place to launch this next chapter of my life. So I think that's part of this, using menopause as an initiation, as a spiritual initiation is, there is in any initiation, there's going to be challenge. There's going to be some trials and tribulations, but to be able to use that as spiritual growth, we have this opportunity to look at those challenges as growth opportunities.
A question
things that happen just not to us, but for us.
Menopause is a natural cycle, but there are many women like myself who go through it because of a hysterectomy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was told of all the terrible things that could happen to me. And I had my surgery, I came home, and none of them happened. Okay. I'm very, very lucky. I didn't get into a depressive state. I didn't have, excessive bleeding, nothing. And I woke up one morning and I said, if that's what it's all like, hey, this is great. So I never even had the hot flashes either. However, I'm almost 20 years past that time. And I started having symptoms as if I were just going through menopause. And thank God for a wonderful female doctor that I have. When I called her, first thing she said was, now you're part of the club. And I said, okay, good. But even going through it now, I've taken it upon myself to just wing through it. Okay, I'm having a hot flash and it's 30 degrees out. I enjoy being warm right now. It's 96 here in Cleveland today. Having a hot flash, I'll come back into the house where it's air conditioned. So I think if we can start talking as women about all these things and mothers talking to daughters, I think we're going to be healthier in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your experience, because menopause is different for everybody, whether you were, forced into it by a hysterectomy, whether it occurred naturally. It's different for every woman. And I think that's part of why there's so much confusion around menopause. Most people don't even understand the definition of, perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. And so just talking about what it is and what symptoms might occur, what things you can naturally do about it. And I love how you reframed hot flashes. That's, similar to the way I do. I've been cold all my life. So when, I look forward to hot flashes. Like, I really need a hot flash right now. And so when I have them, it's like, oh, this, it feels good to me. Some women have really, really intense hot flashes to the point where they feel their skin is burning off their bodies.
Right.
And so, there are, cooling herbs that you can take. There are, certain things that you can include in your diet to help your body to navigate those and to reduce symptoms. But I love the reframe around, this is what I'm experiencing. What is the opportunity here?
Right.
What's the positive side of this? And that's one of the things that I love to do when I work with women is to look for those positives, those opportunities in whatever it is we're experiencing.
Sure.
And I want to just go back really briefly to those cultures in the past, and maybe in some parts of the world today, where women actually look forward to menopause. And I think that was because it was talked about. It was talked about in a positive way. And women who were post-menopause were the elders, they were the wisdom keepers. And the tribes and the villages really respected the wisdom that comes from menopause, the wisdom that comes from living a long life and having gone through all the various transitions that a woman goes through in her life and all the wisdom she accumulates from that. And so the young women were taught about the transitions from first menarche through pregnancy and postpartum, through peri, mid, and post menopause. And, they grow up looking forward to it. They can't wait until they are the elders of their culture. And they're the ones who are respected for their wisdom. And, I think that in our culture, women are, we have this culture that's surrounding beauty and one particular standard of beauty. And that's how our culture reveres women. And of course, women are beautiful in so many different ways. But if we can start talking about the beauty of our wisdom, the beauty of the mature woman, and the beauty of how her body is so changeable, and it just flows through these different transitions and cycles throughout her life, and what a beautiful thing that is. I think that at some point it would be wonderful for all our culture to get to that place where we look forward to being the mature woman, to being the wisdom keeper, to being the wise elder of our society.
I would love to hear, there's so many things I want to ask you, so we may have to have you back on the show because you've got so much wisdom and so much rich knowledge of this phase of life. Beauty, I find that a fascinating topic. And I'm recalling as you're speaking, maybe 5 years ago, I was with my parents I was up north. I think we were in Ashland, Oregon at a dinner party with a couple different generations. I was middle-aged, and then my parents, of course, they're another generation, and some of their friends. And then there was even a younger guy. And the topic of beauty came up. And I said, I think the most beautiful woman in the world is Wang Ad Ogi. I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but she is now, I think she's maybe 105, and everyone's like, oh, you're crazy, and I was like, look her up, she's gorgeous, so and I'll leave her name in the chat. I think she's really, because she loves who she is. You can see that in her face. She's also a tattoo artist, so she's got amazing tattoos all over her body. And she's from an indigenous tribe in the Philippines. I can't pronounce it, so I'll put her in the chat. I mean, not the chat, the show notes. But tell us about your ideas about beauty, especially in all the stages of menopause, because I think that's another thing that's maybe part of the death and part of like we're losing it because we're so, I even put in my notes, women, it seems to come to like women are just valued for their ability to, quote, make babies on some visceral level. And a lot of the things you're saying and the work that you do seems to address this really deep unconscious. So I know that was a lot, but I'll just repeat the question as, what about beauty, and how we think we've lost that, and we've lost part of our value? How can we also, feel that beauty that I think you can maybe feel, maybe indigenous cultures, maybe that's why I gravitate to Wang Od Ogi.
That is a very, deep and broad subject, but I love that you brought that up, because it definitely is part of my work and how I want to work with women, because in our society, as I mentioned, and as you hinted at, we have a very specific standard of what beauty is. And different cultures have different standards of beauty. And in the past, cultures have had different standards of beauty. And in some cultures, a much more round, voluptuous, juicy, image of a woman was the standard of culture. And in our lifetime, in our generation, in the last couple generations, it has, been, very thin, very toned, and very fresh and young looking, and that for our culture is what beauty is. And so I think it's important for us to remember that that's not the way it's always been, and that in different areas of the world, it's still not that way. And that's one of the reasons I actually love belly dance, is because, belly dance was a traditional, ancient cultural form of women's empowerment. It was performed by women, only for women audiences. And the dance tells the story of a woman's life and all the stages she goes through. But, in that culture, women with lots of curves are, the standard of beauty, and much more revered. And so I think it takes, stepping back and broadening our view of, what is a woman? And I think that's one of the questions that we have the opportunity to ask in menopause is, what is a woman? What is beautiful? What is beautiful about me? What is beautiful about me when I was young? What is beautiful about me now? And, what is the beauty in that transition? And what's the opportunity? Just like we were talking about, like what's the positive side of hot flashes? Well, what's the positive sign of wrinkles? Some people call these, wisdom wrinkles or laugh lines. That means that we have experienced a lot of joy and that we have a lot of wisdom now. And in traditional Chinese medicine, these lines that you get that go from your nose around the corners of your lips and down to your chin, when you develop those lines, that means that you have found your life purpose. So, in some cultures, gaining wrinkles is actually kind of like a milestone, something you look forward to. And so I think we have this opportunity to not only, reframe our spiritual lives and, to evolve spiritually, but we have an opportunity to look at, what is the beauty? What is the physical beauty of the mature women? Mm. And that's a new concept, I think, for many of us in our culture. And so I think that's another thing that needs to be talked about. But, for instance, when in my personal experience, when I was a teenager and a young woman, I grew up eating a lot of junk food. I had a horrible diet, and that showed in my skin. I had a lot of acne. My skin was very oily. And, at that time of life when, our culture thinks, this is the perfect age, you have that young, fresh look, and this is all about the beauty of, being a young woman. Well, I felt like I wasn't beautiful then because I had all of these skin issues. And of course, as I educated myself and I learned about natural medicine and natural living and got older, I experienced much better health in all areas, and I was able to cure myself of chronic disease. That's a whole other story. But also I was able to heal my skin. And now, as you know, I'm 52 this year, and my skin is healthier than it's ever been. And so, you know, we can look at those things. You know, I love my skin. I love my body much more than I did when I was 20. You know, I had all these insecurities when I was 20. I was in a different place of life. I didn't have the life experience, but now I do. And, you know, that's another thing about belly dancing, is that it puts you in touch with your body, and it opens you up in a way that you learn to love your body in a way that you didn't earlier in life or before you experienced. Movement is really a great way to release stuck energy, to release old baggage that you may have been holding, especially around your body. And so that's why I just love how these three elements of natural beauty and natural movement and natural health all blend together, because there's really a through line there. And so, yeah, as far as beauty, I have always felt like women have this natural light, you know, that emanates from them when they accept themselves, you know, when they allow themselves to shine. And I've always loved the artistry and the creativity of makeup, but I never wanted to cover up my face. I always just loved the idea of using it to accentuate the beauty that's there. And so I think that's a great component for us in midlife, to be able to use that creativity to enhance our beauty, whether we do that through makeup, whether we do it through hair or clothing, or the way we move our bodies, or the way we express ourselves. I think that that's just another opportunity for us to grow and express who we really are and who we want to become through the beauty of the mature, wise woman.
I love that. That was a lot. We're getting a lot today, a lot from Vanessa. I know you're writing a book too, and I think that a lot of this is going to come through. So maybe we'll have you back. Remind me when your book comes out, because you can come back on our show.
Oh, I would love to.
Yeah. And so I know that you work with food and herbs. You may be reluctant to, prescribe something, but are there some favorites? Sometimes for me, I know I go through sort of like, I love a certain herb or tea. I maybe it's partly what I'm gravitating towards, but sometimes I find other people, need that too. The universe sort of brings things to us. And can you tell us a little bit about how you work with your clients? And especially, I know that, having that mentor, that guide, I don't know what you call yourself, but and I know that you say goddess, like this is the goddess coming through you. I love that too, because it really speaks to menopause, not as a going down, but like expanding into the goddess. So talk a little bit about herbs and foods, and if you want to throw out some tips.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are definitely things I could say in general, but really, in order to for it to be the most useful, you really need to specialize it to your own body, your own situation, your own medical history. So these are just some general things. When I work with women, firstly, we always look at the digestion, because if you can't digest what you're consuming, you can't assimilate it, and it's not going to do you any good. You could eat the best diet, you can take the most perfect herbs for you, but if you can't assimilate it, you're not going to get the benefits. So we always start with the gut and make sure that you've got, a healthy microflora, a good balance of, beneficial probiotics in your gut. And so most of the time we look at probiotics, we look at how you get that through food, fermented foods, the vast variety that you can incorporate in your diet to make sure that your gut is ordered and working as best as it can. We look at phytoestrogens in foods. These can help to balance our hormones as we're going through the transition of perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause. And phytoestrogens are just the natural hormones that are in plants that our bodies can assimilate very easily and use to balance our hormones. We look at stress reduction because the one thing that causes the most imbalance in our hormones is cortisol, having a high stress level, high cortisol. So we look at ways to reduce stress. And then we look at the adrenals and the liver, because if we're having high levels of cortisol, that probably means our adrenals are fatigued and overloaded and overworked. So for that, we talk about adaptogenic herbs. And I love things like milky oats, or holy basil, or ashwagandha, or nettles, to help support the adrenals and help our bodies deal with stress. And then for the liver, the liver is our first organ of detoxification. But what a lot of people don't know is that it also has to metabolize all of our hormones. So if we're having fluctuating hormones and excess cortisol, or excess estrogen or whatever, that all needs to be metabolized through the liver. So the liver can get really sluggish. So giving the liver some love with good nutrient-dense foods and herbs like dandelion root and burdock root, and nettles also are really great for nourishing the liver, and just cleansing it in a really loving way. I don't like a lot of the harsh cleanses or detoxes that are out there that a lot of women feel like they need to do during this time of life. Mm-hmm. I really focus on nourishing and really loving your organs, loving your body through using your food as medicine and using herbs as food as medicine. So those are just a few of the things that I start with. I also generally will work homeopathically and find a good constitutional homeopathic remedy, or work with flower essences. Flower essences are really gentle but very profound, and they don't have interactions. So even if a woman is on medication for some other condition, homeopathy and flower essences can be a great way to start addressing her health naturally and bring her back to balance. So those are just a few quick tips.
Thank you so much. This has been great. And I was just, that's why I think that, well, I don't really have homeopathy in chakra tonics, but I do have flower essences.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just love what you do, and I can't wait to have you back when your book is out, and that will give our listeners and your future readers and all your clients even more resources, because I think we just need this wisdom that you're bringing out about menopause, and we need to keep hearing it, because when the culture around us is not reinforcing the wise messages that we're getting, it's like our signals get kind of bugged or we're not getting the right signal. So I'm so excited for you and what you're doing in the world. Vanessa, thank you so much. Any parting words, Karen, or questions?
Well, I again do believe that we need to have Vanessa on again. And what I'd also like you to think about, Vanessa, we are starting a new series on grief. And I know the American woman grieves while she's going through menopause. And I think that would be a great discussion for us to have, because I didn't grieve, okay? But so many of my friends did. and I could not relate. And, I just sat back and nodded my head and whatever. But now hearing some of the things that you've talked about sort of makes me understand why they were grieving. But I think it's a time really to rejoice, because it means that we are evolving and we're going to the next stage. And the next stage can be as beautiful, if not even more so, than the last stage. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. And grief is definitely a big piece of this, and we need to honor that and acknowledge it before we can get to the rejoicing. So, it's a process, and we can't skip over those things. So I'm so happy to hear that you are addressing that and, bringing that show, which I'm sure is going to be really valuable to a lot of women.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, we will see you in a couple of weeks again, Elise. Thank you very much. And hold up your book again. Come on. I want to make sure everybody buys it.
Chakra Tonics, if you're listening, Chakra Tonics, Essential Elixirs for the Mind, Body, and Spirit.
Sounds wonderful. Have a great day, ladies. Bye-bye now.